and welcome to Quirky Cooking Chats. I'm back. I know it's been a while. Today I'm going to interview two of my very good friends, Pearce and Damian Kristof. So Damian is a chiropractor, naturopath and nutritionist down in Melbourne. And Marcus is he was a journalist and a footy commentator, and he's an author. And they together have a podcast called 100 Not Out, which is all about longevity and living a healthy, happy, vibrant life into old age. And they contacted me and said, we've just gotten back from one of our retreats they had a retreat in Sardinia and a retreat in Ikaria in Greece. And they had some things that had popped up while they were away that just blew their minds, and they wanted to share. And I was like, this is awesome. Let's talk about this. So I'm getting them on the chat. So let's just get started and get right into this discussion. I love chatting with these guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy. Well, I should just start this podcast by saying I haven't done a podcast for months, and what better way to get back into it than to have my two old buddies. Actually, you're not old. I mean, my two buddies.
Forever young, buddy.
Yeah.
Speaking of old, guys, this is your jam, longevity. Where have you been?
And we hit 600 episodes the other day. So
Can't even imagine.
Yeah, 600. So that's called longevity in a podcast for sure. But yeah, we've been traveling. Pearce and I have been traveling. We went over to Ikaria in Greece, the number one blue zone in Europe, and we went to the number two blue zone in Europe, and arguably number one, Sardinia, and we loved it. It was unbelievable. It was such a great time.
I haven't been to Greece either.
Joe, just amazing.
Damo's favorite emoji whilst we were in Sardinia, because so many beliefs were burst, was that brain exploding emoji of just, oh my gosh, for years I've been thinking this versus that. And, we can talk about it, on this chat, but I remember Damo and I looking at each other, scratching our heads after our brains had exploded when we're at an olive grove, and Evo, our host, was sharing with us that Sardinia was very late to the party of the Industrial Revolution, and they only really started getting good at olive oil out of the olives in about the 1950s, and up until then they'd been cooking with lard and tallow, and in all this conversation about how plant-based the blue zones are.
Yes.
Mo and I were both like, oh my gosh, Joe would love to hear this. This is just so, counterculture to the narrative at the moment. And we kind of just felt compelled to share this with your listeners because, and so many other things, but it really does go to the very heart of how on track the quirky cooking community is. I mean, I say that seriously because so many people are confused about what to eat and so on. You go to the oldest cultures that are doing longevity the best. And as Damo says, arguably Sardinia is number one at this, but
wow,
it's really interesting as to how again, counterculture they are to what people are scrolling on Instagram these days.
Yeah, well, we might just start. Maybe can you just give a bit of an explanation about what you guys do over there and why you started going over there? And
yeah, sure. Firstly, Joe, what I didn't say when we first got onto the podcast is I actually didn't realize you're recording. Is thank you so much for having us on your podcast.
You're welcome. I'll do an intro later.
I was like, all right, ready for the intro. 3, 2, 1. Bang, and there was nothing. Anyway, here we are.
Well, this is a quirky podcast. It's just whatever it is, it is.
Yeah, it was funny. PC is talking before, and we're talking about how on track and how spot on you are with all of your listeners and your whole community, and the diet approach that you're using. How on track you are from a longevity perspective. That it's no longer quirky to eat this way, and so in terms of quirky cooking, it's actually the best. It's not weird anymore. It's spot on. So yeah, that's really good. Yeah. But we started doing this because the podcast started because I was fearful of turning 40. And so I was like, I don't know, maybe I was 38 or something, 38 cute. At the time. And Pearce said to me, Damo, don't stress about it. I'm like, mate, what happens when you turn 40? Do you fall to pieces? Do I start feeling pain? What's going on?
Life begins.
Well, that's what I got told. And I was like, I don't know if I believe that. So we started doing this podcast. He sent me this CD or DVD. That's what it was. It was a DVD. It had pictures on it. And so I put that into my DVD player and I watched this video, and it blew me away. Like all these old people doing great things. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Well,
I
that's a
remember that
long way away
video.
from me.
Oh, it was called the 100 Plus Club,
Yeah,
which
Yeah.
was a club that probably still exists in Queensland, that the local
Yeah.
government organised for centenarians in
Oh,
the
okay.
region.
Yeah.
Just
And so then
celebrating
we
elders.
obviously got going with our podcast, 600 episodes, nearly 12 years ago. And we quickly discovered that from a nutrition perspective, it wasn't necessarily nutrition that was keeping these people alive.
Mm.
And then we thought, oh my gosh, maybe, they're all CrossFitters. And so then we started asking questions about, are they CrossFitters or, triathletes? Are they running ultra marathons? And none of them knew what we were talking about. And then we asked them whether or not they were, gluten-free or FODMAP or whatever, and none of that sort of stuff. None of them had any of that. And then I think I asked somebody if they've ever eaten quinoa, and they said, what's quinoa? Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a nutrition thing. So we went on this exploration, and then somewhere early in the piece, Pearce said, have you heard of the blue zones? We started talking about the blue zones because Dan Buettner had brought out studies in 2007 about with National Geographic about the areas in the world that live a long time.
Yeah.
And we started to kind of learn about it. And then on Channel 7 one night, Thea Parakos was being interviewed, and she was in Ikaria. And Marcus said, I'm gonna reach out and contact her. And so he did. He called her in Greece, and they had this chat. And she's American Greek, and so she could understand what Pearce was saying, it's really important. And so they were chatting. And he said, what do you reckon if we brought a group of people over to Ikaria, would that be cool with you? And this is like in 2016 or 2015, maybe 2014, we started organizing it. And then in 2016, we took our first group over to Ikaria, and we spent 10 days there. And we thought, this is unbelievable. So we've continued to do that. Then COVID hit, that silly little virus thing that came around and gave us all the bad cold. It stopped us from being able to get over there for a little bit. And then last year we went back, and then we'd also organized to go to Sardinia. And this year we went to Sardinia, and our host over there is Ivo Parisi, and he's got a PhD in metabolism, and he's a super smart guy, a chef, really clever. And Marcus and I had a little bromance over in Sardinia last year. We traveled around Sardinia, got a little car. We could have got a big car, but we got a little one so we could sit closer to each other. And we zoomed around Sardinia, and we learned what we could then offer as a program. And we just did that. We just did the 10-day program only a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And it was mind-blowing, unbelievably good. So that's kind of how it all began. And this is where we're up to. So we've been doing Ikaria for 8 years. And Sardinia, we did our first one this year.
And what kind of things do you do during that? Is it 10 days?
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about this around the dining table at both locations when, friends of the attendees would be saying, so what did you do? Like, what's it all about? Because it's not a retreat and it's not a workshop, and it's we call it an experience because everyone's going to have their own experience. But in Ikaria, one day you're going to what we might call the apiary, but the local honey lady to pat the bees, and another activity you might be going.
No, actually, Joe, pat the bees. Like,
really?
Actually, yeah, 100%.
Yep.
And like we didn't even wear safety clothes. No safety clothes. Like,
They were gentle bees.
Yep.
No, actually, I did get bitten. One did fly down my top, and I got a bite, and it just swelled and bruised. So I thought, oh my God, I've got a permanent mark. I'll have to get a tattoo. So
it'll remind you of Greece forever.
X marks the spot. But we'll pop into a village and sit down with the locals and ask them about their life. And then we might go for a hike and end up at a beach or under a waterfall, and we'll go to a festival. In Sardinia, we'll do similar things. It's got a lot richer history, but we'll walk around a village and bump into locals. And we're in one village, Sayulo, and two of the locals invited us into their home for a wine and for a chat. And it's very bespoke. It's very organic. It's not like Australian events where you do this at 9 o'clock and then you do this at 12 and then you do this at 3, and you have to do everything or else you miss the bus. Like, it's very, it's very laid back. In Ikaria, we're busy being slow, very slow. And
I love it.
In Sardinia, it's a lot more dynamic. It's a bigger island. Sardinia, we call it the needle in the haystack blue zone because it's 13 villages in an island of a population of 1.5 million people, and you've got to go to the most unvisited, untouristic, like, again, don't want to swear, but the arse end of the world type thing in Sardinia. Whereas in Ikaria, the whole island is a blue zone, but it's only population 7.5 to 8,500.
Okay.
It's not very many people on the island. So in Ikaria, we stay in one village, Nas, which is like that's where National Geographic were based. You stay there for 10 days. You get a bus and whatever to certain locations. But in Sardinia, you're on the move. You're on the hunt because it's a much bigger island. Wherever you go, the landscape changes dramatically, and the lessons do as well. You know, what we learned in the big city is different to what we learned in the little villages. So it's really interesting from a longevity perspective. But more than that, it's the lessons that we bring home are very diverse, and what everyone learns is different. So, you know, it's very interesting for us. We hope it's interesting for your listeners, but it's very interesting for us.
Oh, it sounds interesting. So they're just basically absorbing the lifestyle of people that live a long time and seeing what it looks like in real life.
Yeah, totally. Because what you see, Joe, like there's a whole bunch of experts out there now that would be, I suppose, experts in the longevity space, but it's very much about biohacking. So it's all about, what can I take to extend my lifespan? What do I need to do that's going to offset this, that makes this here more potent, that enables my DNA to stop unraveling as fast as what it has been? So it's all about biohacking. And so it's more of an outside in kind of model. It's very reductionist in its approach, which kind of appeals to a lot of people because most people understand a medical model, like the medical health model, is very outside in. Like you're looking for, what can I bring in? Like, what do I have to stop? What do I have to cancel? What do I have to stop so that I can actually live a long time? That's the medical model. Whereas in this, which is very much a chiropractic model, and I think this will, resonate with you, Joe, this is more of a salutogenic model in that we're looking to find ways in which we could improve our experience with life so that when we do get to older life, we're still enjoying the experience. Yeah. And that kind of redefines longevity. So it's like an enjoyment of old age as opposed to the pursuit of a number. Exactly. And I think it's nicer that way.
Oh, for sure.
Pretty happy. I'll be happy if I reach 100. I'll be wrapped. If I'm really in good shape and probably still playing golf and maybe even still doing this podcast in 50 years time. Who knows if there'll be podcasts? Awesome. Imagine if there's podcasts still in 50 years time. And so we're immersed in the culture. And you can't help but adapt some of those principles and bring them back home. And so you start to live that stuff.
Yeah.
Just a couple of stories based on what Damo said just then, Joe. We were in this little Sardinian village, Saiulo, which is very much the blue zone capital of longevity. It's a little village of about 850 people, and I think there's about 45 centenarians in Saiulo. And we arrive into town, and Evo, our host, sits us around this little amphitheater, and he points up to a tree, and he tells us that in Saiulo, which is quite isolated from the coastline, it's up in the mountains, they've never really had access to seafood. And so however many decades ago, they started planting walnut trees around the village. And nowhere else in Sardinia is there walnut trees around the village, nowhere else in Sardinia do they really grow walnut trees like this. And in this village of 850 people, there are over 400 walnut trees.
Wow.
And he took us on a trip to go and count the number of walnut trees. And so what Damo's referencing there is modern longevity, or more medical longevity, would go, oh, walnut trees in the longevity capital of Sardinia. Let's make a walnut oil and market it as a longevity blend. Or let's turn this into a superfood or so on. But
you've got to have this much a day and
all of that. Whereas we were just going, oh, we could go home and plant a walnut tree, but Damo reminded us it takes 9 years to bear the first fruits. Do we have that amount of patience?
But you've got to have longevity to get your walnuts.
Yeah, and I think the thing that Damo, what Damo is saying that is clarified in this message is what Evo also reminded us in this amphitheater whilst we were about to go walking, was it's not just the 400 odd walnut trees, but to have a look at the front doors of the houses in the village, and to look at how many doors have keys the front door key sitting in the door.
I was
And
going to
so
say,
you've
or
got
doors
this village
open.
of keys and trees where you've got all of these keys in the door because they have what we would call an open door policy, a drop-in culture, but also from a really healthy longevity perspective, which we might call safety. If something was to happen to some of these older people in their homes, the last thing you want to be do is locked out of the house trying to get in. So there's a real element of emotional safety in this as well. And so it's very confronting for people to go, do I have an open door policy in my life? Do I let people into my life easily? Am I actually hard to get to because the door's locked, you can't find me, and so on? Yes, I might grow a walnut tree, but I think keys is more important than trees. Trees is a good thing, but keys, are we making it easy to have a great social life? And it's really quite confronting for people that were with us on that trip as we walked through the village, up hills and down hills. And yes, how many trees we saw, but also how many keys we saw in the doors as well.
I love that. That's really good.
Isn't it? It's super nice. Hey,
Yeah.
super nice. Yeah.
What you were saying before about the biohacking, I just wanted to ask your opinion as a nutritionist. What do you think of this idea of taking 1 million supplements to try and live a long time?
Oh, Joe. It's like, it's such a weird thing that I love the concept of filling in the gaps. Like, I love that whole idea, but I prefer that you filled in the gaps with food, like that'd be way better. So if you could identify where you're going wrong, find the food that's going to actually fix it. I think when people kind of go wrong and then they get some kind of condition, something's going on, then something else has to step in to help them, to maybe control or to bring things under control. But I don't think it's a long-term strategy. I don't think you need to be taking supplements that are made from chemicals, like to get to a ripe old age. It seems weird to me that you would have to take a B vitamin that's possibly synthetic or likely to be synthetic, and probably comes from the petrochemical industry, which, it's kind of a bit counterintuitive. So I also think that we're playing with fire when we take individual nutrients, because it's similar to taking individual drugs. It's just that it's not as strong. So you never in nature find, I don't know, L-threonine, or you never in nature find L-glutamine, or you never in nature find vitamin B6, all by itself. Like, all of these nutrients are always inside food or inside a liquid that you're consuming or whatever else. Like, you're not finding resveratrol naturally unless you're drinking wine. So it's weird to me that people might think that because that's the active constituent and because it's natural, that it's going to be safe, because there has to be an upstream and a downstream consequence for taking an individual nutrient for a long period of time. And I think that can create imbalance. So for example, if we just use magnesium, and don't get me wrong, as a chiropractor, I prescribe magnesium. As a naturopath, I prescribe magnesium, but I'm trying to sort out a dysfunction or a problem. Ideally, I'll be prescribing food to help them, from a long-term perspective. But the short-term consumption of magnesium won't be bad. But if I take magnesium too much for too long, then I could create a calcium imbalance or a potassium imbalance or a sodium imbalance, and so I start to get consequences as a result of taking a single nutrient in excess over a long period of time, because my body has to self-regulate. The body is way smarter than what our brain is. And we've got to remember that.
So if you're living in a traditional society where, maybe 50 years ago, maybe even now in these places, and you're not thinking like we do in the Western society, where you've got to, I've got to take supplements, I'm feeling tired or whatever. Everything's coming from your food and your environment, right? And the way that you sleep and the way that you interact with people. And this is what we're missing in Western society. We've gone away from that. So so I guess with your retreats, you're really helping people to see that again.
Yeah. Well, we are. Marcus, do you want to go now? Have a little chat.
Well,
and then I'll
I was
come
just
in.
so a couple of things here. Like, when Damo and I were getting ready to go to Ikaria for the 5th time, I thought before the 2nd time, I was like, oh, is this going to be boring? We've already been here. Like, we already know everything because we came here last year. Like so naive and stupid. And obviously the second time blew my mind, as did the third and the fourth. But the fifth time, Damo and I are like, all right, this will be, days 41 to 50 in Ikaria. What are we thinking? And Damo's like, you know what? I am just looking forward to slowing down because it's just really hard to live a slow life in Australia. And I was like, that is so true. So Damo is the one that says, before we get to Ikaria, let's actually just chill out for a couple of days in Athens. Let's have our friendship time before we kick into like running the trip time. But even when we're in Ikaria, like we're working, but it's also really slow to the point where when I came home just literally 2 nights ago, I had a poor night's sleep. Damo had that terrible second night's sleep post-trip where, you come back from a long-haul flight and your first night's all right, but your second night you wake up in the middle of the night and you just can't sleep. That happened. Well, I had a poor night's sleep 2 nights ago, and I was like, I don't remember having a poor night's sleep in Ikaria, but we'd be going to bed at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning and getting up at 8 or 9 and breaking all these sleep rules.
That's
but
funny.
Still having a good night's sleep. And then I had 1 poor night's sleep here and I had a headache. I felt lethargic. My happiness factor was down, and it just made me like, it ruffles your feathers of like, how do you create this? So even just today, I was like, I think I have to have more than a half an hour break in the middle of the day. I actually thought I'm going to talk to Damo because Damo is the master of like slowing down in the middle of the day. He has lunch normally with someone else. He has, I think, maybe a 2-hour break in between.
Oh, that's good.
And that is very European.
Wow, you're like having a siesta, hey?
Yeah, but no, I think that's just what I wanted to say before Damo chimes in here. But I think this is the type of stuff that we're like, oh, how do I do that? Like I work 9 to 5, particularly if I work in corporate or I have young kids. Like, how do we create this lifestyle where we can actually slow down? Because that's what you just said at the end of your comment there, Joe. It's like we can have all the nutrients in the world, but if we're going 100 miles an hour, something's got to give.
What do you reckon, Joe? What do you reckon about nutrients and supplements? What's your take on it?
Oh, same as you. I would rather go for the food every time, and supplements of sunshine and sitting next to a waterfall and going for a walk around the lake and hanging out with friends and having a good laugh. And those are the things that make me feel energized, when you're feeling low. Of course, sometimes you need some vitamin C and all those things. But I just find it's really such a big picture approach that we should be having, not a reductionist approach, like you said. Definitely agree.
Yeah. It is a really fascinating thing when you get into these cultures and you're living over there and you're staying in and you're immersing yourself in it. Like, and so going back to what Marcus said earlier on, like we call them an experience, would say that going to Ikaria is kind of an immersion because you're dumped in one spot. You have to slow down, otherwise they're looking at you going crazy. I remember Marcus and I in our very first year getting up like bright and early at 5 o'clock, and we go, let's go for a run, because we're going to get to this longevity thing, and we go for a run, and we find that the road runs out, and then we're running down the hill, and then we're running up the hill, and we're puffing, and we're sweating bullets. It's like 400 degrees at 5 o'clock in the morning, and this truck goes past with 15 blokes in it, and it was only a 4-door ute, and there was like 15 blokes in there all hanging out, and they look at us and they slow down and they look at us and go, are these
crazy
guys okay?
foreigners?
What's going on here, right? So we get back, we go, maybe we should turn around. So we turn around, we go back to NAS, and we puffing and sweating bullets. And we're not looking great. We're looking so bad with our longevity journey. And Thea, who's our host, she goes, what are you guys doing? Are you all right? Are you sick? We're like, no, we just went for a run. She goes, a run? What were you running from? And we're like, no, we weren't running from anything. She goes, what were you running to? And we're like, no, we weren't running anywhere. Like, she goes, what did you do that for? So it was like really such a funny,
gorgeous. I love it.
Wake up call, So, for us, being immersed in that is a great reminder of, what's really important. How do they do it? That doesn't mean that we don't want to go for a run. Like I'm, running at the moment. I like it. It's something for enjoyment. I'm not doing running for longevity. Yes. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. it's fascinating too, you know, when we're over there and we're drinking the local red wine, you don't wake up with a hangover the next day. Like there's something
That's weird.
about it, you know, it's maybe because it's more pure,
Yeah,
maybe because it's, you know,
natural.
more natural, hasn't been, you know, hasn't had additives and stuff in it. But, you
Mm.
know, it takes a long time to consume it. And you're kind of hanging out with people for a long period of time, having good chats and laughing. And meal times take a long time. Breakfast takes a long time.
Mm.
Lunch takes a long time. Dinner takes a long time. And it's late. Like everything's
Yes.
late. So it's just, but, you know, maybe over here we kind of get sucked into having to be busy to get
Mm.
our work done and our life done so that we've got that half an hour or an hour of enjoyment at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah,
So
that's it.
it's kind of where people get to.
Yeah.
Mm.
I remember when I was in Italy in June, we had a school fundraiser and it was a lunch, and we were all bringing food and everything. We were there from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. eating lunch. It was
That's
so fun.
that's the
And by the
best.
time we got to like 5:30, everyone's like, we're hungry again. Let's get the food out again. So we just got the food out again and started again. And then after about, I think it was 6:30 before we went home. It was so funny. But
Ah,
just, yeah, just sitting and chatting and the sunshine, and it was great.
yeah.
But let's talk about the food, because I do want to hear about this. Yeah, I think people have an idea of the Mediterranean diet being the pinnacle of what you should be eating to be healthy, and the blue zones and all that. Maybe you could explain a little bit about what's the common belief around the Mediterranean diet, and what did you see that kind of smashed that?
Yeah. Well, when we had a reflection point last year when we were in Sardinia, Joe. We'd been talking about the Mediterranean diet. So at some point we're like, how weird is it that all these countries are in the Mediterranean, but they don't all eat the same food? And we were like, isn't that weird? You know,
Where's this
what is
Mediterranean diet?
what is this Mediterranean diet thing? You know, so we're just like kind of digesting it, thinking about it, because the Sardinians who are on the water around the coast, they're having a different diet to the Sardinians that are up in the mountains,
Mm.
who have no access to fish, and might eat, let's say, horse, like they have goat or horse
Oh,
or
wow.
lamb. Whereas down in the water areas, they're having fish and maybe more chickens and eggs, you know, for example.
Mhm.
So the diet kind of shifts and varies quite a lot. You know, definitely they're having olives and definitely having, you know, fresh fruit when it's in season, tomatoes and cucumbers, those sorts of things kind of form a basis. But there's little variances based on where they live and what can grow. So that was interesting. And then
Mm.
and delicacies like beautiful food like created in Sardinia from catching a fish. For example, there's a fish called the grey mullet, and this fish that's called the grey mullet um, swims into these lagoons that are very, very rich, and they're a great um, kind of location to supply fish for the island, you know, that in the seaside towns. And inside the female grey mullet is a really big ovary, which is what we would call roe. And
Mm.
they remove that ovary once the fish has been caught, and then the fish is dead. And then they take this ovary out.
In case anyone was
Unlike
worrying.
us,
I
we
like that
take
anyone
ovaries out
out
when
there
the
listening
women's
to
still
like,
alive. And so, like, but these fish are dead. And then so these ovaries then dehydrated with salt and cured, and then you
Hmm.
use that to grate over the top of your pasta or over the top of your
Oh,
salad.
really? Because
It's
it would be so salty, wouldn't it?
salty
yeah.
and fishy, but
Mm.
delicious, like delicious. And so
Huh.
that was really interesting. We're like, oh, we didn't get this in Ikaria. And then we realized that it was totally different, because in
Yeah.
Ikaria, the diet over there is totally different, even though it's a Mediterranean diet. And yes, they have cucumbers and tomatoes, that's true, and olives, but everything else was, you know, very, very different. They had, you know, goat really was the only red meat that you could have. You could have pig because they have wild boar.
Mm-hmm.
But you
Not
know,
much
they don't
pasta. Not much pasta in your career.
very
Okay.
little pasta. Like, in
Yeah.
fact, if they had pasta, it was very strange and it wasn't
Yeah, it
expected.
felt
So
weird. Felt
yeah,
like
weird.
tourist food.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
tourist food. Yeah, you go to the Italian restaurant in Ikaria to get, you know, some
Yeah.
pasta, but it's definitely not part of their longevity culture. So you're looking at that. Anyway, then part of, and PC said this almost in the, you know, the opening parts of this podcast with you, Joe, today. He said that one of the things that we learned was that olive oil um, really didn't become popular in Sardinia until the 50s or 60s, when they'd found ways in which they could refine the olives easy enough to be able to get enough oil from it.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, in other words, olive oil isn't really a mainstay of the Mediterranean diet. Now that's a mind-blowing situation, because everyone would say that olive oil, like, what's the oil that they have in the Mediterranean region? What's the oil that they all have? And everyone's gonna go, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, olive oil. You know, that's what they're gonna say. And it's not the case. Yes, they do have it. It's way more expensive than petrol. Like, you can't,
Oh,
you're gonna pay more for olive oil in Greece and Sardinia and in Italy and in Europe. You're gonna pay by a factor of, I'm going to work this out. So to buy petrol, you're paying $2 a litre. To buy olive oil, you're paying about, what is it, $19 a litre. So it's very, very expensive, and it's just doubled in price because it's really hard for them to get access to it. And the Spanish have kind of taken over the olive oil market by producing really crappy olive oil and then exporting it. So the Spanish are making the worst olive oil on the planet and sending that over to Australia and to New Zealand, and people thinking, oh, it's extra virgin olive oil, I'll have that, I'll buy it, but it's the worst in terms of quality. And so, but you don't get the good stuff. They don't really export the good stuff. So you got to have Australian and New Zealand. But what we learned there was that maybe olive oil is not all, it's not the thing. You know, I, even when I've been practicing for the last 30 years, Joe, as you know, and I've always said, yep, 2 dessert spoons of olive oil 3 times a day. That's what the Mediterranean diet suggests. And that's really, you know, that's the secret to longevity. That's the last
well, I'm sure you didn't say just that.
But that's the last little piece. That's the last piece for me that I've been hanging on to, that talked about the Mediterranean diet being the secret. I would still say that the approach that they seem to take in the Mediterranean region to food and nutrition and consumption of food is probably about right. But it's not going to come down to the olive oil, and it's not going to come down to the grey mullet, and it's not going to come down to the horse that they're eating in Sardinia.
Thankfully.
It's not going to be that, you know. So it's a really, that's a fascinating thing, because then you look at the Okinawans, and the Okinawans in Japan, they're not having the Mediterranean diet.
No,
you know, they're doing something different.
So yeah, when I was first started going to Italy and doing retreats with my friend Lucy, she lives in a little village up in the very top of Italy, so almost in France, up in that area. And she's done GAPS. That's how we met online, through GAPS. And I was putting together my recipes for the retreat, and I, you know, wanted her to get all this olive oil because I was going to use all this olive oil, and I use a lot of ghee as well, and, you know, other things, but butter and ghee. But she's like, oh, you're not going to use olive oil for like frying things and cooking things, are you? I'm like, oh yeah, you know. She's like, yeah, but she's like that's not really good for the gut. And she's like, and that's not really GAPS, and that's not really how we do it here. Like we and I'm like, oh, okay. And so she sort of taught me about how they used to always use lard, and that was more traditional, and it's better for the gut, and if it's the, you know, the good stuff, not the preservative filled stuff from the supermarket. And just explaining that kind of thing, and that kind of blew my mind. And then I was a little bit hesitant to believe it at first. I was like, yeah, but olive oil, it's like super healthy. And then I started to hear other gut health practitioners online talking about, like, there's this one who specializes in hypothyroidism and autoimmune disease and stuff. And she has been through a big journey, gut healing journey herself. And she said that it's really important to eat more animal fats than you are eating olive oil. Really bring back the olive oil and have more animal fats. And she explains why for autoimmune disease and gut health. And I was just like blown away again. And now you guys are coming out and saying this again. So I thought it's really good to talk about this. Go ahead.
Well, this kind of goes back to what Damo said earlier. It's almost an inconvenient truth, but if you were to extract a single nutrient out of a plant and market that as a solution versus the whole food solution. I mean, even Evo was very keen to remind us this in Sardinia. Olive oil is still refined. Like, it's not a whole food, you know, source. Like, you got to go through a lot of effort to get that oil, and I forget the ratios, Damo, but he would tell us how many kilos of olives it would take to make, how many kilos of olive oil, and you realize how much effort's required. And then you think of what nature
Like
provides.
15 kilos, like 15 kilos of olives gets you 1 liter of olive oil.
Okay, right. Yeah.
That's heaps.
Yeah, it is.
That's heaps.
That effort. And then if you play the same game with lard or tallow, you can see how much, on a better term, less refined, or how like nature has provided the intelligence right there.
Yeah.
And it's staring us in the face, but it still blows our minds. We even struggle to believe it. Even as you said, quirky Joe still even struggles to get her head around the idea. You can imagine what the everyday consumer is trying to get their head around with this. And we've been going on these trips for nearly 10 years, and we're coming back after 8 years going, oh my gosh, maybe
you learned something else.
Yeah, learn something else. So it's really, it is challenging, but we feel that if we don't share these, and as you said, we're the next people now sharing a similar message. If we don't share this, how do we navigate our way through this longevity maze? Because we're all getting older. Australia is right up there for longevity, and none of us wants to have longevity without quality of life. As Damo was saying earlier, we all want to enjoy our old age. As Damo called it earlier, like these are some of the ingredients that we just have to be really wary of as we go about, learning how to live.
One of the things that I've heard animal fats is really good for is the brain, and for helping you to not get Alzheimer's and dementia. Can you tell us anything about that, Damo?
Yeah. Obviously, in the 80s, saturated fat was demonized. But we also didn't see the same rates of diabetes. We didn't see the same rates of dementia and Alzheimer's that we had back then. Now, I'm not going to draw a causative link to this, but when you have a low-fat diet, particularly when you have a low saturated fat diet, you have to manufacture your own saturated fat. So you're going to make saturated fat yourself from either the carbohydrates that you consume, or the monounsaturated fats, or the polyunsaturated fats that you consume. So your body still has to make saturated fat, one, to keep warm, and two, to help manufacture hormones. And you need fat to assist in the manufacturing of cholesterol. And cholesterol is really important as an adjuvant to manufacture hormones, as well as certain nutrients. So, for example, vitamin D. And then, so for all the things that our body requires, we actually do need saturated fat. So we either get it in our diet, or we have to make it ourselves. So, and I know I've been very, very brief there, just talking about some of the things and the reasons why we might need it, but we do really need it. What's really interesting is when you look at Sardinia and you look at Okinawa's dropping off the blue zone list because they're dying early and they're dying fast. And they've got, in Okinawa, they have the highest rates of diabetes in all of Japan. So the kids there are getting type 2 and type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes is like this uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, where they need now to use insulin because type 2 diabetics aren't controlling it with their diet. So they're getting this in Okinawa now. And this is one of the blue zones.
Why?
Great question. And we could easily just say it's because they're having all the Maccas and the KFC and all that sort of stuff, which is very true. They're definitely having all that. But there's a pursuit of some degree of lifestyle, which is relatively easy and fast and that sort of stuff. But when we look at Italy, and even when we go to Greece, the younger people aren't following the traditional lifestyles of it. They go, well, we live in this area. We can do what we want. We're going to live a long time anyway, don't you know? And so they're on the vapes and they're smoking cigarettes and they're doing all kinds of things that are not good, and then they're driving themselves into disease as opposed into longevity. So it's good for us to explore it while it still exists, because we can kind of get a really nice sense. But we talked to Evo says that the thing that's knocking them off in Italy is their diet, having 5 meals per day. There's this perception that, sorry, not 5 meals, it's 5 meals in a meal. So it's 5 courses.
So overeating.
So they're getting diabetes as well. So at a young age, 60, 70 years old, they're getting type 2 diabetes, and even younger, they're getting type 2 diabetes because they've thought that it's culturally appropriate to have antipasto before you have your salad, before then you have your main, and then you're having a pasta, or your pasta, then your main, and then you have a dessert, dolce. And so there's these 5 courses that you'd have with your main meal. That's not what is traditional. It's kind of, that's a nice Italian, Sardinian way to kind of eat, but it's not traditionally the way in which they did it from a longevity perspective. The people that lived a long time had smaller meals that were very specific with the food that was in season at the time, not laying their plate full.
So a long lunch isn't necessarily eating the whole time. It's just a lot of chatting.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing. That whole bottomless brunch and long lunch, which might seem like just a piss up in Australia, is what we would say. Like in Ikaria, Sardinia, and other cultures that do this well, it's enjoying the experience, the people, the socialization, yes, the food, but it's not defined by those
how much
things.
you eat.
Yeah, and that's I don't know if that's a maturity thing, because I'm still a bit, where Australia has a lot to learn about this, our relationship to food and alcohol, but those long experiences are so magical, as you shared earlier, Joe, with your school fundraiser. You'll remember that forever.
Oh,
If
yeah.
there wasn't good food, and I'm not sure if there was alcohol there, but good food, good people, good times, they are rich experiences. And Damo was talking about Okinawa earlier, and I was going to say, even with Ikaria and Sardinia, there are, like you said, younger people with poor health practices and so on. What seems to define, in our experiences, Ikaria and Sardinia, we can't say this for Okinawa, but the younger people still look up to the older people.
Well, that's good.
They want to spend time with their parents and their grandparents, so
lovely.
So that does give, I can't speak for Damo, but it gives me some confidence that they will be able to navigate this longevity maze better than if they were like, the crusty old grandparents, or my parents have no idea. Like, there's a bit of the, they leave the island to go and see the world, and then they come back. I think that's almost a human condition, not just a location thing. But it's hard to know if Okinawa's level of unhealth, again, the centenarians are fine, but their kids and grandkids who are either disconnected from the land, disconnected from the culture, disconnected from that traditional way of life. That's why it's dropping off the perch, because they've definitely lost some reverence around some of those core ingredients.
Yeah, very true.
So
very
what's some good takeaways that people can think about to apply in a Western culture, in a busy life, to help us slow down and bring some of these principles into our lives?
Well, I'll just do a couple of things here, Damo, because it's more just a summary of what we've just said. Like, I think keys and trees is a really good way just to think about your life, connection to the land. If it's trees, it's missing. Maybe it's gardening. Damo's an epic gardener. He'd been home for 5
Damo?
months. He was in the garden. Oh my gosh!
Oh my goodness, I want to see your garden. I have a garden too. Mine's messy. India's at home working in it right now.
I reckon your garden would be way better than my garden. I've got a beautiful garden, but it's not filled with food yet. So at the moment, it's just filled with plants, and it's beautiful.
That's
like
pretty beautiful, though.
It's pretty, but we've got a little garden.
That feeds the soul.
Yeah, it does. You're spot on. And if we go back, let's go 8 years back. I was listening to a podcast, and I was weeding the garden, and I was listening to the podcast to 2 of my mates. And one of them says, if you do time wasting things, like gardening, like you're not being efficient,
Really?
And I was
like I'm not listening to that podcast anymore.
You know this person, Joe.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. This podcast is no longer going, but the idea was all about efficiency and what does a champion do, and what are the things that they've got to kind of be focusing on in order to win and succeed at life and all that sort of stuff. And essentially you decide by killing off all other options. So decide, breaking into 2 words, insecticide or herbicide or fungicide. So side to kill off, and decide to get rid of all the other decisions. So you have to decide what's important. And this person, not the guy that's also on this podcast with us right now, but the other guy that was on the podcast said, you got to get rid of all the things that are inefficient, like gardening. And I was going, this is feeding my soul. This is feeding my soul. So I love being in the garden, because it nourishes me in another way.
Yep. Sorry, we interrupted, Marcus.
No, that's okay. No, it's a great point. So I think keys and trees is a really good way just to go, where can I make an improvement? I think the speed of life, which we mentioned earlier, just that is we can eat the best diet and we can exercise and that, but if everything is just one hectic to-do list, it's probably one of the great adjustments in life that not easy to make. I think what Damo was just referencing with the 5-course meals, like one meal, everyone gathering around to help make one meal, one sitting. It can go for a long time, but one meal. Something I just shared this with some people earlier this morning, and is having faith in people. There's a few. We often like to put our faith in things, technology and whatever. But Ikaria and Sardinia innately put their faith in people. They want to spend time with you, and so many of our attendees, when we're going, "What are your takeaways?" It's like, I have to transform my social life and my relationship to people, whether it's their marriage, their friendship groups, their children, their colleagues. It's quite confronting how innately, like, highly prioritized people are in Ikaria and Sardinia. And so I think restoring our faith in people is a really, really big element. And then something that we brought up a bit on this conversation was, like, longevity very much is a recent phenomenon. Like, we can't think that it's steeped in thousands of years. Evo, our host in Sardinia, was so keen to remind us that longevity's only been a thing in Sardinia for, 40, 50 years. Up until then, like, they're all just doing their best. It's only because we've now got data and science and technology and so on. Up until then, it was all just everyone scratching out a living. And so Damo and I get a really, not triggered, but we're, let's say, confused by, Dave Asprey says you'll live to 180, and Dave Sinclair says aging is a disease, and Brian Johnson says, do not die. And you've got a lot of, like, future-proofing longevity experts that are, I won't talk for Damo, but they've overshot the mark in terms of the projections. I'm a romantic. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the past and the present, examples being set for longevity, and I think we need to honor them. But again, we've said this before on 100 Not Out, each to their own. Damo and I might be the wrong one, so to speak. And it's not something singular, but I think there's some of the key elements for me. But I'm sure Damo's got others as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just talk about the food thing. I think that's pretty simple. And it seems weird talking to your group about food, because I think
it's good.
highly likely they're all nailing it. But even though, when we talk about this whole olive oil thing, I wouldn't throw olive oil out.
No.
I wouldn't say that this is bad. Like, olive oil is not a bad food for you. But there's possibly better ways in which you could cook with oil, and that might include the removal of olive oil from the cooking pan. So maybe using a saturated fat for your cooking. And when I say saturated fat, I'm talking like proper saturated fat, not talking coconut oil. I'm talking like proper saturated fat. The coconut oil burns. It's got a flash point that's too low. And I think your listeners would probably know that. And then olive oil can be hotter, but still it's not meant to be, overly heated. So if I'm using olive oil when I'm cooking, so for example, this morning I made a really quick scramble with the Greek salad because I needed to get to golf, and I wanted to eat something that was really wholesome. So I had a little Greek salad with some, and I made the eggs with ricotta. So I had that little bit of extra protein. And I just used a little bit of olive oil mainly for flavor. And it was spectacular, like really good. But it was done on a low heat. Like, I've got and
it's quick.
It was totally fine. Like, it took me 5 minutes to get them to cook. I could make it cook in 10 seconds if I made it really hot, but I'm denaturing the products. So I don't want to do that. So I think keeping things fresh and in season are probably the most important things. And when you can't have it fresh and in season, then have it preserved. So, for example, your olives, they're going to be preserved. You might have some samphire, which is a seaside vegetable. That'll be preserved. I love
samphire.
Me too. I love it. I bought some back from Ikaria too.
Oh, that's
cool. Do you have samphire up near where you live, Joe?
No, I had it in London.
Oh, really?
Wow. So good.
There you go. Well, samphire, you can go down to the beaches here in Melbourne and pick up samphire, like, it's just there. So, but it's a beautiful little sea vegetable. And so if you can't have it fresh, then have it preserved. Don't get, if you can't get it in season, have it preserved. but don't have it fresh out of season, because that means it's come from somewhere else or it's been grown in, strange conditions. So think about your seasonality of your foods. I think that's really important. The other thing is too, that from a alcohol perspective, and this is really, I suppose, important, like alcohol should never be consumed by yourself. Like it should be consumed with friends or with family if you're to consume it. And it's done matched at the same pace as water. So you would be having a drink of wine, for example, and you would match that with the same amount of water. And that's a social conditioning thing. So it's not like, all right, let's crack open a bottle and nail it. Oh my gosh, I forgot to drink water. Oh, I'll drink it tomorrow. Like it's got to be, you're cracking open the bottle of wine. You have your 140 mil pour, whatever you want, and then you're going to double that with water, so you're actually having enough water to kind of just get the body right. And that was just something that they do anyway. Like it was just part of what it is that they do. Not that they were looking to stave off a hangover or stave off any kind of ill health. It's just that's how they
That's
consume
how they do it.
Yeah, so it just made sense.
We drank a lot of water over there.
That's good.
A lot of water, a whole lot of water, like way more water than you'd think.
Oh dear.
But,
Can you go there if you don't drink? Because I don't.
Absolutely.
Well, they think I'm weird.
No, that's the best part of it. That's what I love about those cultures is they're not like Australians. It's like, what do you mean you don't drink?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's so beautiful and non-threatening.
Oh,
there's no peer pressure. Yeah, no peer pressure to behave in a particular way. And, they cater for all, food, lifestyles, all that sort of stuff, like if you got to be dairy free or gluten free or whatever it is, like whatever is, kind of going on, then they can cater for it.
That's nice.
And they, and they're very open to that, because really what they're trying to do is provide you with food that you can eat, because they want you to join in.
Because they love to feed you.
Yeah, they love to feed. They do. Like it, and
So
the only time they take offense is when you say no. And so if you said, if they said, would you like some wine? Say, no, I don't drink alcohol. They go, no worries, that's totally fine, But if they offered you a drink and they know that you drink and you said no, then they'd be upset.
Yeah.
That's why Marcus never said no. So,
he was just very scared of offending.
He's like, yes, see. Give me more.
It sounds like a beautiful trip, and it sounds very much like it might be difficult to fit back into busy life once you get home. Is it, or are you going okay? Just keeping life slow.
I don't know how to answer it, because I think at times you feel like you've got it, and then at times you feel like you don't. But I
guess that's
I'm
true.
Sure you feel the same, Joe, when you come back from your retreat in Italy. Like you have so many big thoughts. I'm sure our attendees are the same. It's like you have so many big thoughts about how to live your life, but you don't want to lose sight of the good old living in the present moment and enjoying the blessings of living in Australia and with all of our mod cons and Wi-Fi. Like we can be grateful for these things, like
it does make life comfortable.
About slowing down and all the rest of it. That's a great challenge to have when we live in a country that has so many privileges that goes with it. So it's my way of saying I don't want to complain about anything, because that'd sound so precious.
I just noticed when I got home that I found it difficult to be outdoors as much as I was when I was away, because when you're out, I guess when you're on a holiday though, it's different, and you're just walking everywhere and getting so much outdoors time, and then you get home, it's like, right, I'm going to keep this up and I'm going to get up early to make sure. And it's like the workload.
Yeah,
Sorry,
totally.
what were you going to say, Damo?
No, you're spot on, Joe. Like the workload is intense, so same when we get back. And I asked Marcus, so we've always traditionally recorded our podcast on a Wednesday. And because we record on a Wednesday, and Wednesday is also golf day, I've finished golf, I have lunch with the boys, and then I bolt home to be able to record. And so then it's like record. And then Pearce's got to get going because he's got to take Darby to soccer or whatever's going on, or footy or whatever. There's always something. And because he's got 4 children. And so there's so much he's got to do. And so our Wednesday then becomes a day that's not really that restful or relaxing, because it's so urgent. So I said to him, Piercy, I want to kind of correct it. Like I want to just, correct course here because we're talking about ease and I don't feel ease in my week. He goes, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd love to record on a Monday. So why don't we record on a Monday, have our meetings about 100 Not Out and what else we're going to do to help people understand and how we can promote the trips and all that sort of stuff. And he goes, okay, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? So now we do it on a Monday. I now have, Wednesdays to be able to play golf. And then obviously today's a Wednesday and we're recording. This is like a comfortable kind of thing to do. Like it's not, I don't feel like we're racing around and bolting to the end. So
well, that's good.
My week has been properly designed to enable me to go at a pace that is not only mainly sustainable, but is enjoyable,
Yes.
And so I think given the shifts and the changes of the last couple of years with the way in which we can manage our workplace and work environment, most people could do a better job at the way in which their work life has been set up.
Yes, I agree.
It's no longer 5 days in the office. You don't have to do that anymore. So just got to find ways in which they can do that better. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, well said, Damo.
Oh, so many good things in that. Thank you so much, guys. So have you got some places people can find you for those who may not know you? You never know. There might be someone who doesn't know you. I mean, how can you not know these two?
Well, no, definitely. As a few attendees, when we arrived, they're like, oh, I get to meet you. You guys are famous. We're like, no, we're not famous. As soon as you get to a cafe and we get mobbed, then we're famous. Like Damo and I met a Hollywood actor in Athens last year and we had an Aperol with him. And we didn't know how famous he was.
Oh, that's hilarious.
We were having the Aperol and people mobbed him and we were like, that's fame.
Okay.
We're definitely not famous, but Damo and I have we have excelled at Instagram Reels whilst we're in Ikaria.
You have. I was so impressed.
Yeah, Damo is a gun. I'm in his shadow, but the thing is, if people are interested in what we've spoken about today, a great highlights reel is available at Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, we're at 100.notout, Facebook 100notout. And then our website with all the details of our trips and our podcast, all 600 episodes of them is at 100notout.com, 100notout.com. So that's probably the best way for people to get to know us, I think.
Cool. And I'll put the links in the show notes. Sounds
Thank
good.
You, Joe. Thanks,
You're
Joe.
So
good
nice
to see
chat
you.
Up with you. Catch up.
Oh, I love that you're chatting us up. That's the best. I feel a bit chatted up.
Oh my goodness.
Catch up. It worked. It worked. My heart's fluttering.
And somewhere in the early 600s, we're going to chat you up on 100 Not Out, Joe.
That sounds like fun.
We're going to share more of the quirky cooking message with our listeners. So for everyone who listens to this podcast, listen out for Joe in an upcoming episode of 100 Not Out.
Yes. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a lovely rest of the week.
You too. See ya.
Thanks.